Scott, thank you. I was telling a client today that the hardest part is when somebody says something nice about you or to you, and it's always learn how to say thank you versus uh-uh. So we just went through exactly what we talked about today. So that's really cool. Um, Scott is co in this. So um, I've worked with him and he's amazing, adding in any of his own experience and as well as mine. And again, this is not a therapeutic session, but if there's any questions we can answer about anything, we will do that. One of the things I just wanted to go over briefly, because I continue to get these questions, and it may be from partners, spouses, anyone that's trying to understand or learn something, and I'm sure you'll different things on the website about any of this, but I just wanted to hit on cross addiction. When you hear that term, it's usually an example of, let's say, a sex addict, because I work with people that have sexual intimacy disorders, and a drug or alcohol or an eating disorder or anything else that they're using to help medicate, to help get away from whatever the problems or issues are. It means that if you have a cross addiction, you don't have to act out on both or any of those things all at one time. You may choose to, I may choose to drink. I really don't, but I have to say that. I may choose to use drugs. I may choose to act out sexually, but it doesn't mean that I have to act out at the same time on other addictive patterns of behavior. So doesn't mean that they don't, but it doesn't mean that I have to. Now, the big difference is there's a co-occurring addiction category. And that's usually when a client, whatever their addictive pattern of behavior is, in this case, we're referring to a lot of sexual things, they may have to use drugs, alcohol, other type of addictive patterns of behavior. And you usually see them using them together. Like I may start out with using a drug and then go out and act out sexually. That's where, if you've read Dr. David Fawcett's book on chemsex, that's the most common area that he wrote about, when that's usually with amphetamines, cocaine, and sex addiction together. And he refers to it as the fusion of the two. So you have one that can have multiple addictions and choose to use them in whatever order or whatever cycle or pattern of addiction they're in, or a co-occurring addiction, and they're usually seen being used together. One can precede the other, one can, it doesn't matter which one starts first. But the most common that we're seeing a lot of today in population, and that's all ages. It's not just somebody that's young, like some people think they're just young. No, I have men and women that I have worked with that will be using meth, cocaine, and sex because of the enhancing aspect and the fusion of the two. So I know you're very familiar with that, working with your sponsees and things and all of your knowledge. Scott, do you want to think to that?
Sure. I mean, I'll just add my 2 cents about cross and co-occurring addiction. I'm a cross addict. I am an alcoholic, a drug addict, and a sex addict. For me, it was all about emotional escape and not feeling. So I didn't care which one it was. Although sex addiction is the daddy, as I say, it's my primary addiction. But if I was drunk, or if I was drinking, I was so drunk I couldn't act out sexually, and if I was high, I was so high I couldn't act out sexually, and if I was acting out sexually, I didn't want to be drunk or high because then, because I wouldn't be able to function. So I just spun from one to the other, and particularly in early recovery, I would be sober for my sex addiction for 30 days, and I'd get a 30-day chip, and I'd be all proud of myself, but I would have been drunk for 30 days straight, and then I'd feel bad about the drinking, so I'd switch to drugs, and it was just, I spun from one to the other, and I was cross-addicted, and I was never really sober. It took me a couple of years before I actually kind of got some actual, real sobriety.
Right. And sometimes it's those are some of the steps moving towards sobriety is, that you work with one thing at a time, and, you're solid and you're working on that. But you may not have told somebody about the other part, or you may not be ready to work on that part yet. So I'm not saying that, everyone can get help from either category. And some people may not understand the connection that can be there. So that's why I wanted to bring it up tonight, just to make sure people keep hearing that over and over again. Doesn't mean that if your spouse or partner is drinking that they're having sex with someone. It doesn't mean that at all, but it does mean there's a pattern of behavior there, and that it could flare up into something else. So
cross addicts, cross addicted substance sex people tend to get sober from substances first. Yes. And then their life doesn't get any better because they're still active in an addiction, and they realize it's the sex part of their addiction. And later they get into recovery for that. I did it backwards. I got into sexual recovery first, then got sober from substances. But usually it's one and then the other. Co-occurring addicts are people who do stuff, as Karen said, at the same time. It can be for the enhancing effects. It can also be for a little bit of numbing effects. I have shame about what I like to do sexually, so I have to get drunk to have sex. David Fawcett lists about 12 different reasons for co-occurring substance sex addiction. Those individuals often will seek help for both at the same time because they get it, that it's sort of paired and fused. And we see a lot of that at our treatment center. Karen deals with it all the time.
Right. And just to say this, there's always hope. If somebody really wants to be in recovery, there is hope. There's hope for change, and there's hope that they can see reasons. A lot of times as a trauma therapist, you're looking at, well, where did things start? How did I get to where I don't want to be? And I do have a lot of shame, and I do have a lot of guilt, and I do have that, and I do have this. It's all about looking at the why, like, how did I get off on this path? And if I understand the why, then, and I'm working in recovery with people that I can connect with, I can have an intimate, healthy relationship with, and that means friends, that means partners, that means whatever it is that the more I'm talking about the underlying issues, the better chance I have. I'm connecting, I'm getting those things out, so I don't have to numb it out, because numbing is only going away for a short while.
Yeah. So, should we take some questions? You want to take some questions, Karen?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
All right. First one here. I'm a gay man with co-occurring addictions to sex and meth. Usually gay men will call that chemsex addiction, by the way. But we call it paired substance sex addiction. Usually at Seeking Integrity, because a lot of people associate the word chemsex only with gay men, but other populations have co-opted it. So those terms are kind of used interchangeably. Okay, so I'm a gay man with co-occurring addictions to sex and meth. I've attended both SLA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and NA, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, but I do not fully identify with either one, as always one part of my chemsex addiction, there's that term, is left out. Which fellowships would you recommend? Are there other places to connect outside of the 12 steps for support for chemsex addiction? Good question.
There's a lot of times, and help me out on this one, Scott, a lot of times what we have seen is that connecting with somebody as a sponsor and understanding what their background is, how they identify, all of that is hugely important for each person to be able to reach out and find somebody that they can be honest with, that they can be understood. Everything is about connection and understanding, so that you can stay in recovery and move into recovery. I know that Dr. Fawcett talked one time about, it didn't really matter which meeting I went to, I needed to know how to connect first, and then start spreading that sponsor to other people, and identify and connect with them. So it's sort of like a chain that occurs. Are there any special meetings? I don't know where this person lives or anything like that.
As a gay man, you know, there are a number of sex addiction programs: Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, and there's also Sexaholics Anonymous. As a gay man, I do not recommend Sexaholics Anonymous. You will not feel comfortable there. Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous may feel comfortable to you. You may want to look at SAA meetings if there are some with a lot of gay men, or you may want to look, if you live on the West Coast, there's a lot of SCA, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, which is basically the gay version of SAA in the beginning. You know, they've all become much more mixed. But I know at an SCA meeting on the West Coast, you're going to meet a lot of gay men, and a lot of them are going to have a chemsex problem because it's very common among gay men. You know, you don't appear to be going to CMA meetings, which are crystal meth anonymous meetings. And those can be very triggering for chemsex addicts, particularly if there's a lot of gay men there, because they are also chemsex addicts, but they're only acknowledging the meth part, so they still act out sexually. You have to find meetings that you're comfortable with. And Karen mentioned finding some people to connect with. I would look in the sexual recovery meetings first for people who are also in substance abuse recovery, and I would start talking to them and see what they do in your area. Every town is going to be different,
Right.
but they will probably have something that works for them that might also work for you. There is no Chemsex Anonymous program yet. There may be at some point fairly soon, and hey, if you want to start one, there's a task for you.
I think that's it only takes two to have a meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
what
a
a
coffee
great
pot.
idea.
You do need a coffee pot.
Oh, that's a requirement. It's you know, that, and I do like to have cookies at mine. So there you go. But I think that the key to it is taking that step out there to reach out to somebody and start asking and see where you need to go from there. And it's so varied because of like Scott said, I mean, maybe it's a small town, maybe you're in a big metro area. It depends on where you are. There's also some things that we could probably post somewhere of different, what you're referring to, Scott, and post it so that that can be seen, and you can go online and actually look up each one of those type of meetings.
We have a resource page on both sexandrelationshiphealing.com and seekingintegrity.com where we list all of the 12-step programs. So I would
be a good place
that.
to go. Right.
Yeah. But go to your S meetings, your sex addiction meetings, and share that you also have a substance abuse problem and it's co-occurring and you need some help. I think that's where you're going to find people who know what you're talking about, much more than a straight up NA meeting.
Right.
Not that you shouldn't go to NA or CMA.
Agreed.
Yeah. Can you elaborate? This is definitely a Karen question. Can you elaborate with examples of dissociative identity disorder? And then it goes on to say, I struggle with gender identity and sex addiction and often ask which came first, if that even matters. Another good question.
There's two different terms that are used. One is you may have somebody say that you dissociate. Well, my definition of dissociation is you go away. It's like maybe I'm bored and I'm sitting there, or I'm thinking about trauma and I sort of turn my brain off for a minute. Some people have the ability to do that at will, which is fascinating. If you think in terms of, we all do dissociate in some way. If I drive myself to work and I drive the same route every single day, there may be one day that all of a sudden I go, wow, I got here that fast. And it's not that I got there any faster, it's just my brain was not all in gear as it should have been when I'm driving, because I'm thinking about something else. If you're in a sexual arena, you could be having a fantasy, you could be having this or that. So dissociation is different than just our mind is thinking about something else. Dissociative identity disorder is usually seen as a person that may have multiple, what they call multiple parts, or multiple, like a family system inside. I may have, and I have seen it, it is true. Some people will say that it's not, but it's a true diagnosis, where I may have had trauma at a certain time in my life, and my brain as a kid can't handle that. I don't know how to take that in or do anything with it. So it's like that part of me can turn off, and I may be someone at that age. I may be Scott, be called Scott at that age. And so the process of working, many people use a process of what's called family systems of reintegration of different parts. Another way to explain it, not mental health wise, is I, as a human being, have a part of me that it may be my angry part, it may be my mother part, it may be my therapist part. And it's who comes into play, who shows up, and can everyone show up and live together? Can I be a mother, a therapist, and a partner at the same time? Yes. And my answers and things like that would be different in each situation. But true DID is around people that have had trauma, and there may be one or two. I got a call one time from somebody that said they had 60, and that was interesting. Did not work with that person due to they need a lot more help than what I could provide. But to work at reintegration and accepting that part back, and part of that, I so far have not seen it unless there's trauma associated with it. It doesn't mean it doesn't occur for other reasons. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't explain that part of it, nor am I, excellent on the brain and things such as that. But I know the type of people that I've worked with, and you may see them. They may talk different. They may wear different clothing. They may switch back and forth. But I have seen that reintegration occur, and it also comes online with doing some trauma work as well.
Karen, can you talk a little bit about, this is a person who's also dealing with gender identity and sex addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what gender identity disorder is first? Is that even a disorder? I think it is.
No, it's not. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Gender
I mean,
dysphoria, whatever it is.
People call it that, but I don't know that I consider it a disorder. And it's more of I am not sure. I may have on a birth certificate that I am a female, but I'm struggling inside because I'm attracted to women. And it's like being confused. I feel one way, I think, and a lot of people, now it's getting better, a lot of people never would talk about it, until they were much older. But it's a struggle with who do I really identify with? Do I identify with females, birth gender, or bio as they call it, or do I identify as a guy? Do I identify, who do I choose to be with? And so that's why I don't believe that it's a disorder. I believe it can be a disturbance because you never know, and you're worried about saying one thing or who am I with. I know a lot of people that I work with or have, been friends with that will say when they were 8 years old, they knew they were gay. So in their mind and who they are is what they were at 8 years old, but they couldn't say that until later on. And a lot of discovery and a lot of processing and probably a lot of pain and hurt. So I think our society is getting better in understanding and trying to learn about these things.
Yeah.
And
Karen was answering about both gender identity and also sexual orientation there, kind of dealing with both of them in her answer. Those are very different things. If I'm born male but really feel like I'm female, I have an issue with my gender. If I'm male and I'm attracted to male, I have an issue with my sexual orientation, and I don't use the term issue in a bad way.
Right.
I have one of my best friends is a trans female. She was born male. She was always very uncomfortable in her own skin. I knew her for quite a while in recovery as a male adult. And now I know her as a female adult. And the first time she had moved to another town to go to school, and when she came back, she was a she. And I looked at her and said, "This is the first time I've ever seen you where you look comfortable in your own skin."
Oh, well, Scott, that's
And
cool.
that was a real revelation for me, because I never sort of I understood intellectually what a gender identity issue was, but to actually see someone who had transitioned from male to female and was so much more comfortable as a female,
Mhm.
I got it. I finally understood. The gay
Mhm.
thing, I'm gay. I understand gay. I don't understand
Yeah.
how people are straight, but,
Mhm.
because that's not me. But so anyway, so now sex addiction is generally comes from, like all addictions, they're based in early life trauma. Is that right, Karen? And can you talk a little
Mhm.
bit about that and how having a gender identity issue, um,
Mhm.
to be questioning your gender might actually play into sex addiction?
Oh, exactly. Yes, exactly. One of the things I want to add is when when somebody is in a trans process, um, he, she, whatever they refer to themselves as, he, she, it, many different pronouns with that. It doesn't always mean that they go through the medical reassigning process. It may be that they choose to live their life um, in a female non-changed body. So it doesn't always mean that somebody is actually having surgery or that they're on hormones to change one way or the other, but they choose to live and be around other transgender people, or also they choose to be with, with whoever they want to be with. So it usually, and that takes a longer time, and that's a bigger decision, and for them to make, because it's not something that you can go back on. So a lot of people are, the doctors make sure that they have some psychological help to make sure that's really what they want to do in changing their body. So going back to trauma related kind of things, um, there's, Scott, I don't know that I have seen a definite trauma. It's different for everybody. Okay. So if I have somebody that there's a certain trauma, and it may be around a female, that influences who somebody identifies as or with. Does that make sense? I've seen it, whether it was a trauma male, female, with a male, female client. It doesn't, I haven't seen it always be one way or the other. Um, More of it has been around other things that have occurred in their life and what people believe about themselves. Does that answer that part?
Yeah. The trauma is, if I'm struggling with my gender identity, society's giving me one message, my body and brain are giving me another.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel shame about that, and there's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
dichotomy, and that's going to be traumatic. And I
Mm-hmm.
will eventually learn, if I can't turn to my parents and say, I have a penis, but I feel like a girl, and get some support. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm going to learn to turn to alcohol or drugs or masturbation or sexual behavior or pornography or whatever as a way to escape my shame, my feelings of shame and despair
Mm-hmm.
and depression and all those things.
Many times you see great depression around that, because I'm just going to shut off and not talk to anybody about anything that I feel inside, because who will listen anyway? So people that are younger, and I see them older, it's like nobody ever, I couldn't talk to anybody. I mean, I don't know what my family would have done, or I'd be banned from the family if I said this or asked this question or whatever. And there's a lot of abandonment issues and abuse issues that occur from that. Many times we're working with clients that have never really had a voice because of that fear of, if I say anything, will I still be accepted? Will I still be loved? And that's a trauma in itself too.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. We could probably talk about this for the rest of the hour, and not do it justice. It's such a huge subject. But I hope you're getting some professional help with a knowledgeable therapist who understands gender issues.
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to work through it on your own. And I'm glad
Right.
you're here and talking about it. So the next question here, I'm a female sex addict in therapy for 2 years and 3 months with a CSAT since my diagnosis, and also after a TBI, traumatic brain injury, and an escalation of sex addiction that has always been there. I'm also in 12-step programs for sex addiction for over a year and a half. I have a great sponsor. About 6 to 8 months ago, I came to realize that I'm incredibly intimacy avoidant. I didn't know that before my sex addiction diagnosis. I'm dating a fantastic, healthy guy. He wants to understand and support me with my addiction. I've had to work so hard to keep my feet planted and not run away from him or to sabotage the relationship. What are the best things I can do to get over this, the intimacy avoidance, and how long in general does it take people to stop feeling this way? Great question.
It's a great question. Now, my understanding in the question too is there was a TBI and then there was a behavioral change.
I think the sex addiction was there for a long time, and then there was a TBI, and then I think a lot of this I think happened about the same time. My recollection from this individual.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing we're going to stay away from the TBI because it depends on what happened, where it is, and how the thought process is going on. But if you are somebody that is sexually avoidant, then that would be a great person for a CSAT to be working with a CSAT therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, to really work at what's going on, what triggers you, why do you want to avoid, if you do want to be connected to this person, you do want to be sexual with this person, and it's a healthy relationship, then work with the CSAT therapist to figure out what is going on inside of you sexually that says, you know, wait a minute, I'm not really interested in that, or I'm afraid of it. You know, if I engage, what will happen to me? And more fear of than anything else, but the two different pieces is yeah, a CSAT therapist would be great to work with on that.
Yeah, CSATs are, I think, definitely the best people to help with an issue like that, particularly for somebody who is a sex addict. You know, I see this swing from, you know, over the top sex addiction to, you know, avoidant, sexually avoidant, sexually anorexic, not a term I particularly like, but quite a bit. And I think the underlying issues are the same. I think it's unresolved childhood trauma, and often childhood sexual trauma that's unresolved. And there are lots of ways that childhood sexual trauma can happen, and you don't have to be touched for it to happen. There's such a thing as covert incest, equally damaging. But I think they all stem from the same underlying issues. And Karen, can you talk about dealing with those underlying issues, that trauma, what that process is and how long it takes, and the difficulties involved, and then the kind of progress that people actually see when they do that work?
Right. The first thing is for somebody to understand that there's no shame and it's not your fault. The thing that I hear the most is, if I am a child or adolescent or any age really, and there's been sexual abuse of some type, whether it is rape or whether it is abuse or molestations or things such as that, there's huge, many times that somebody will say, it must have been my fault. I must have done something. Even somebody that is 5 years old and will ask the question of, what did I do wrong? You know, I must have been the person that caused this person to come to me. And it's not. The biggest thing to know is it's not your fault. You didn't create it. You didn't ask for it. You didn't give permission for it. And yet the abuse occurred. Sometimes people will want to connect with their abuser, and then again, they're saying it's my fault. Well, what does an 8-year-old know? What do they really, what can they comprehend and really understand? The key there is to have somebody at an earlier age that they can talk to and help them through it. I don't normally see that that's what's happened, though people are getting better, you know, talking to their kids and teachers and things like that. The trauma process is always about, because it could be multiple layers of trauma. I may have trauma from sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, any type of mental abuse, anything like that could be there. And they all could be there. Because if I'm being yelled at and screamed at and told how I'm ugly and I'm fat and why would anybody want to be around me, or I'm dumb or stupid or things like that, as a child, I'm going to regress. I'm going to pull back. I'm either going to rebel or I'm going to pull back. Most of what I see are people that have, again, learned to be quiet, not say anything, not ask any questions, because it's so painful. And the trauma process goes to your core. I always refer to it as, it's like having a hole inside of you and you can't fill it up and fix it. Most of the time, there's different levels of trauma processing. One can be talk therapy, where they're talking through an actual trauma event that occurred, and they find out that I didn't know I had a trauma. That's a trauma. Well, if I grew up in a family that somebody would hit me every day when they came in, I would think that was normal. I would think that's just what love and connection is about, is you get hit. So when we see people that have had abuse at a later date, or pick a partner that is physically abusive, one of the first questions that's asked is, what was it like growing up? Because we've normalized it to survive it. I can share an honest one, is that I realized at one point in time, after going to a friend's house being very young, that everybody talked really nice to one another at the dinner table. And I thought they were very strange people. Who would have known? Only to find out later that no, that was a healthy family. And people don't scream and yell and throw things at one another. So again, it doesn't matter what age you are. You may really believe that there's nothing there. We can use EMDR processing.
Karen has frozen. Are you there? We've lost you, Karen. Are you there? Okay, well, I will talk until Karen gets back with us. And she probably doesn't even know she's frozen yet. She'll figure it out. I was corrected here by the asker of that question, who's not sexually avoidant. She is intimacy avoidant. And there is definitely a difference between those two manifestations. Sexually avoidant is you're avoiding sex. Intimacy is that emotional connection and the sharing and the closeness that's so important in relations. Karen will be back in just a minute. She's logged out. She's going to log back in. That usually unfreezes us. But I think the underlying issues are probably the same. And you had asked the question, which came first? Probably somebody before asked, it was the previous question. But anyway, it's still the trauma that drives all of this stuff later. So early life trauma is probably driving the intimacy avoidance, as well as the sex addiction. It's just the flip side. And sex addiction is a way to be intimate avoidance. Dr. Rob often says sex addiction is an intimacy disorder. We are afraid of getting or trying to get our needs met with other people. So we turn to alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, whatever, because we're afraid that other people will reject us if they know the real us. And there were some ways to get over, the trauma. Other than the trauma work, you can also do, David always talks about affirmations, and we laugh about Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough. Darn it, people like me. But I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of this connection that I really want. That can help you get over you're back. So yeah, okay, let's hop on to our next question here. By the way, ask us questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll be happy to answer them. So the next question here, Karen, is there a difference between a sex addict and a porn addict? So let's take that one first. Is there a difference between sex addiction and porn addiction?
If somebody is, the only way I can answer that is most sex addicts that I work with have used porn or seen porn at a younger age. And then that's how they start into it. sort of a first step, doesn't always have to be. But if you're using porn and with compulsive masturbation, and that is your way of escaping, of medicating, of doing anything else you want to do, okay, to get away from yourself or your thoughts or whatever, then yes, that's a sex addiction. It falls into those categories. I do have people that understand, especially in partnerships or marriages, where they'll go, there's not really anything wrong. You know, I'm a healthy person. I'm a sexual person. Well, the thing that you have to realize is there's a compulsivity to it. It depends on how often you're doing it. Are you using porn and masturbating 5-6 times a day? Is your partner or spouse that you're committed to, are you pushing them away sexually? Are they concerned? Do they have a problem with it? You have to ask yourself a lot of different questions. I believe we're all sexual beings, and there are ways of using our own body for pleasure, because I do believe that can be the right thing, as long as spiritually or religiously or culturally, there's no issues there. Or especially if it's not compulsive, there's no issues with your spouse partner with you doing that. Was that a pretty straight up answer?
Yeah, I just want to add, first of all, Dr. Rob is writing a book about porn compulsivity addiction, and I wish it was out already. So we would have some written down stuff that we could turn to. Right now, the World Health Organization has a diagnosis that we use for sex addiction and for porn addiction. It's compulsive sexual behavior disorder is the official diagnosis. It encompasses sex addiction, it encompasses porn addiction. The criteria basically boil down to preoccupation to the point of obsession. So we're talking about sexual fantasy and just thinking about sex all the time, whether you're engaging in real world sexual behaviors or online sexual behaviors, or just looking at porn, which is usually an online thing. You're obsessed. You're preoccupied to the point of obsession. You think about it all the time. The next criteria is loss of control. And generally that's evidenced by multiple failed attempts to quit or cut back. I'm never going to cheat on my wife again. And 2 weeks later, you're on a hookup act and you're cheating on your wife. I'm never going to look at porn again. I delete my whole stash of porn. The next day, I'm back wishing I'd never deleted it, and I'm recollecting and reorganizing and doing all that stuff. And then the third criteria is directly related negative consequences. And it could be relationship trouble, it could be financial problems, it could be legal problems, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be shame. I mean, there's all kinds of problems, trouble at work, trouble at school, all of it. So preoccupation to the point of obsession, loss of control, which is failed attempts to quit, and then consequences. That's what certified sex addiction therapists have been using for decades, really. And it's what the World Health Organization has codified in very flowery language with OUR at the end, because they're in Europe, of behavior. But it boils down to those three things. So whether you're a sex addict or a porn addict, it can really look, as Karen said, a lot of it can look the same. What I find in 12-step meetings, and there are now Porn Anonymous and Porn Addicts Anonymous meetings, 12-step meetings. We don't have them here in Palm Springs where I live, but I know that big cities have them, because there are so many people now who have never had sex with a real person, but they certainly meet the criteria for compulsive sexual behavior disorder. They are addicts related to their sexual behavior, but their sexual behavior is all porn. They started looking at porn when they were 10, they're 22 now, they're still looking at porn. They'd like to have a relationship, but they don't know how. And it's tough for them to identify as a sex addict, so they will generally identify more readily as a porn addict. But they meet the criteria for sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior disorder. people my age, you know, I'm a garbage can. I'm a garbage can with booze. I'm a garbage can with drugs. I'm a garbage can with sex. Anything to get me out of my head. Because, you know, it was hard when I'm 16 or 14 or 10, you know, I couldn't find porn. I lived out in the country. There was no porn. I couldn't get it. I would have looked at it if you know, if we had the internet back then. Trust me, I would have been a straight up porn addict probably. But you know, that was then. This is now. A lot of young people get really compulsive with porn really early, and it impacts their social development and you know, their school life. They stop doing homework and they just watch porn all night. But it's tough for them to identify as a sex addict. But often porn addicts will escalate into sexual behaviors, whether they're online, which would be like webcamming and sexting and things like that, or whether they're actually hooking up in person and having affairs and you know, going to strip clubs and things like that. So it can escalate.
Scott, it'll be great when this book out, you know, so things can be clarified. But even just the first three things, you know, the not able to stop, the obsession, everything that goes here, and that's criteria for any addiction.
Right.
Is and the consequences. So, whether it's called addiction or whether it's called sex addiction or whether it's called alcoholism or whether it's called whatever, all of those three criteria are the same things for any type of addictive pattern of behavior. So that's why I usually just refer to the addictive pattern of behavior and how it can show up in so many different ways. But yeah, and I think the saddest part that we hear is when you mention 10-year-olds is many parents, and commercial break, many parents do realize that their children at that age are looking at porn. And I just wonder, our concern as a person is, what does that do? What is happening in their brain as far as how they're going to see what healthy sexual behavior looks like? Many clients that I have seen in my lifetime started seeing their father's porn that they left out. Now I hear a lot of women that are standing up and saying, yeah, I look at porn all the time. Or people that never, you know, they stay up all night, they go to work, they're looking at porn there. Everything is higher risk because it's higher intensity. And it goes back to all of these things being intimacy disorders. Is intensity is a piece that people use to process they use to replace for intimacy, and they're not the same kind of thing. So yes, most of the younger ones are very reserved, no friends, no going out, no connection with the world, other than their little screen.
Yeah, that actually takes us right into our next question, which is porn addiction recovery different from sex addiction recovery? And do you mind if I just take this one? Because I've actually been working on this with Rob.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say. You're the expert right now.
Actually writing this part right now.
Yeah.
So porn addiction recovery and sex addiction recovery and alcoholism recovery and drug addiction recovery and gambling addiction, they all kind of look the same in the beginning. You know, you want to put a lid on, you want to cap the behavior. You know, we're just going to stop acting out. You know, I'm going to stop going to the casino. I'm going to stay out of the bar. I'm not going to buy booze, whatever it is, you're going to stop. Then we're going to look at the denial, all the lies and secrets, all the lies I tell myself about my behavior and the lies I tell the world and the secrets I keep even from myself sometimes. And addicts, we're the best liars and secret keepers in the world. I lied so good, I believed my own BS. And I'm not alone in the addiction world. And then a plan for moving forward in sobriety. You know, that's basically what we do at the Seeking Integrity Treatment Center is, you know, stop the, you know, separate from the behavior, break through the denial, and create some kind of plan for moving forward as a sober person for the rest of your life. And Karen, you can correct me on that if you want. We do other stuff there, obviously, but
right.
But
And it's also working with for anything, any addictive behavior. It's also working with that inside shame and guilt that Scott talked about, is when all of a sudden these things are taken away and maybe you've been challenged that you're going to lose your job, your house, your kids, your family, or whatever, and you have to take a look at it. The reality is there's a whole lot of fear because there's so much shame and guilt. Who will ever believe me again? Will I be able to be in recovery? What is my life going to be like if I don't have this to go to? And so that's a whole different process that we merge together and we work with that. That's where recovery plans come into play so much, is to have those and working with sponsors and people that you can connect with and continue that beginning process so that you've got somebody to call, you've got somebody to talk to if you're having urges to act out in the. So shame and guilt is a big thing.
yeah, absolutely. Shame particularly is the master emotion for all addicts, I think, my personal opinion. Okay, so there were actually then, once we get past those initial stages, there were sex addiction recovery and porn addiction recovery will diverge in one area and can diverge in another area. So the area where they will diverge is the definition of sobriety. Porn addicts, abstinence, no porn. It's like alcohol, it's like drugs. No, you're done. Sex addiction recovery, we're only wanting to do sexual behaviors. It's okay to engage in sexual behaviors that are not part of my addiction. Sex with my wife, probably not part of my addiction. Sex with my neighbor's wife, probably part of my addiction. Sex addiction recovery is not about permanent abstinence. It's more like an eating disorder. I want to learn how to be healthy sexually. I want to learn how to eat in a healthy way. And that doesn't mean I never get to have sex again. And it doesn't mean I never get to have chocolate cake again. It just means I never get to have sex with my neighbor's wife. And I never get to eat the whole chocolate cake. I get a piece. But porn, done. If you're a porn addict, done. If you're a sex addict for whom porn is part of the problem, porn is done. So that's where they will diverge. Now, where the area where they can diverge is, and this is what Dr. Rob and I have been working on, and a few other therapists that we've talked to, and there is some research on this. With porn addicts, they diverge. There are two categories. There are the traditional trauma-driven porn addicts, the people with unresolved early life trauma who have learned to use porn as an escape the same way that alcoholics learn to use alcohol as an escape. We don't want to feel, we don't use porn to feel good. We use porn to feel less. Same thing with alcohol, drugs, whatever. Then the second category is this new category that we're seeing, and they're kids who often don't have any particular trauma. But they started looking at porn when they're 10 or 11, and that is the average age of first use for boys, is 10 or 11, and girls are not far behind. And they just keep using it, and it's because it's easier. It's a lot easier to look at porn than it is to talk to a girl. She might reject me, but porn doesn't reject me. Right. There are no funny odors or sounds with porn. You're kissing a girl and you're making weird noises and she has bad breath and oh my God. You don't have that with porn. And, you don't have to become vulnerable with porn. So kids just keep turning to it over and over and over. And eventually they meet the criteria for compulsive sexual behavior disorder, but their underlying issues are different than a traditional addict, than most other addicts. And in the treatment part, with a traditional trauma-driven addict, eventually you probably need to deal with the trauma. You need to see somebody like Karen who can walk you through the trauma. With these compulsives or these conditioned addicts is what Rob is calling them. It's more about walking them through social development so they can learn how to, all the stuff they missed while they were looking at porn, they walk through it, and usually they tend to have an easier time of staying away from porn, and they tend to progress more quickly and more happily, because it's a different kind of addiction. And this is really the only addiction where we see sort of a non-trauma driven cohort, and we're seeing a lot of it, and they basically, it's just kids basically become conditioned to pornography. Not that viewing pornography at age 10 isn't traumatic, so they also have trauma.
I love the part in describing, it's so easy. What's easier than able to look at my phone and I can just, look at that, nobody knows, here I am, okay. And when you're starting to do that at a young age, then that's your go-to. And then I don't have to be rejected, and I can turn it off or I can turn it on. So I get to use it anytime that I want to.
And
we're
these kids,
seeing,
they just don't learn the relationship skills,
right.
And how to conduct romance. And then they're in their early 20s and they want to have a relationship, but they don't know how to go about it. So they keep turning to porn, and because it's easy, and and this is a new porn addiction cohort. So very long-winded answer. Sorry.
And one of the things that we work with, as well as with anything that someone shows up with, is the how do you build a healthy relationship? If you've never had one and you come in, you're 20 years old, you've never been in any kind of relationship with anyone, the closest people you have are your parents. And that's not the kind of relationship you want to be in the rest of your life. But they don't even know how to start. They don't know how to be communicating with another person. They're used to looking at a screen and seeing that and watching that and having their mind make up whatever they want to make up, or any type of fantasies that they have. But it's really hard to reach out and for me to say, like, hi, Scott, but I don't want to take the chance because I'm afraid he'll reject me. And I can just stay with porn because it will never reject me unless my screen freezes.
So, okay, well, we've got time for one more. This is from someone who is celebrating her 7-year sobriety anniversary tomorrow. Congratulations.
Wow.
So I gave the basic criteria for addiction earlier, and the question is, let's say you, she writes, you were an alcoholic, but let's say you think you were an alcoholic, you decide to quit, and you're able to do it. Does that mean you're not an addict?
That's an interesting question. So
this is another one Dr. Rob has written about. There are casual users,
yes.
There are experimental users, there are at-risk users, which are people who may look like an addict, who may look like an alcoholic, but they start to see problems and they decide to quit, and they can quit. They're an at-risk user. And then there are addicted users.
They can't quit.
We quit. We just pick it up again the next day or 2 weeks
That's
later,
right.
or whatever. Somebody who, if you say, I'm going to quit, and you quit, you probably were having some problems related to your drinking.
Right.
But may not actually be an alcoholic, may have just been a very at-risk drinker, teetering on the verge.
Or put the yet after that. Like, maybe I wasn't an alcoholic yet, because any addiction is going to increase the tolerance level. Everything's going to increase with it. So, that you may not have been, but you could have easily turned into one.
And even that whole, I think that's a gray area. I know people who, drank, were horrendous drinkers, just ugly drinkers, really drunk all the time, and decided to quit. But they were horrendous people afterward because they didn't get any support or help or whatever. And I would consider them alcoholics with really good willpower, maybe, but usually somebody who sees some problems and can quit and doesn't freak out about it and doesn't turn into a a horrible beast over it is probably just at risk as opposed to
Agreed.
full-on alcoholic. We're getting some horror stories from that. She says she was a blackout drunk and the other things. Yes, typical AA. Yeah,
Yes.
you're probably an alcoholic. So,
An
and
alcoholic,
congratulations on your
if you
sobriety.
can't remember, yeah. But there's can people get help to stop and curb that from growing? Yes, they can. But they have to also realize it and make it known that they're having a problem. And that's where I see, sort of like for me is I'll ask people if I'm an alcoholic in recovery and I pick a drink up and I hold it in my hand, relapse. Well, no, it means I better call somebody. But if I take a drink and drink it all, did I relapse? Yes. So you better call somebody. So it's just, there's a process in there. I mean, but again, I always use the word yet, just to be cautious with anyone.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the only person who can really decide if I'm an addict and an alcoholic is me. There are clinical criteria. I can look at them and say, no, I'm not an alcoholic, even though I meet those criteria. Or I can look at those criteria and say, I'm not sure, but I'm definitely an alcoholic. Addicts and alcoholics, we self-identify, we self-diagnose, and then we go get help. And that's just how it works. I mean, we almost never go to the doctor who says, wow, I'm diagnosing you as this, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. It's not how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. Karen, you want to say anything to take us out, or?
I just want to thank everybody for being here and signing in and learning and sharing and asking questions and hopefully helping other people that may be listening. And that's what we try to do. And Scott, I am always honored and appreciate you very much. And you're in the know right now, in the middle of a book, so there's some good stuff coming out.
Hopefully later this year, but
that's great. The more people have, and just remember the website to go to when you don't know what to do or to read up to learn things, and make sure that you know that it's okay to ask for help.
So David will be back next week, and so he and I will see you then. Karen, thank you so much for filling in tonight. Thank you everybody for your great questions. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.